Hi, everybody, and welcome to All Things Aviation and Aerospace. We've, I guess you could almost say, been off the air for a couple of weeks due to the holidays and everything, but it's great to be back. And what a great way to kick things back off by having someone that is quite accomplished, quite iconic in terms of her accomplishments. And it's going to be a kind of a special conversation. We're going to do a one-on-one with her today and spend the entire show talking about her career, her background, her accomplishments, etc. And after having a glimpse at her recently published book and then the conversation we had the other day, as well as looking at her biography and everything, I'm like, well, this is going to be pretty awesome conversation. So, Eileen Collins, welcome to All Things Aviation and Aerospace.
Hi, great
Great.
to be talking with you today.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have the opportunity to talk with you. You know, you're a retired Air Force colonel. You flew in the Air Force, and you're also a retired astronaut. And of course, your claim to fame is that you are the first female pilot of the space shuttle, as well as the commander of the space shuttle. And if I recall correctly, you actually flew the space shuttle 4 times,
That's right. I flew
4 missions
twice as a pilot and twice as commander.
as commander. Exactly. So that's quite a thing to have on your resume. Anyhow, I thought we would kind of start things off and let you tell a little bit about yourself, but going back to, I really wanted to talk about, because you have a very interesting background as to how you became interested in aviation and started to realize that was something you wanted to pursue.
That's right. And I think because I was born in Elmira, New York, which is the home of the National Soaring Museum, growing up there, I would watch the gliders fly overhead. Now, I was a young, I want to say a camper. I attended summer camp near the glider field. And although our camp was not connected to flying, my family really didn't have the money for flying lessons. I was able to watch the gliders fly overhead. And the other thing that happened was my dad was sort of liked airplanes, and he took the family to the airport and to the glider port, and we'd watch airplanes take off and land. So I think that was what kind of set the seed for flying. Something as simple as taking the family and watching airplanes take off and land. That was my dad, but I also want to give credit to my mother, who took the 4 of us kids to the library. And over time, I found the section on aviation, and I started reading books on pilots, and I read about, historical military flights, and read about, I want to say, fiction and nonfiction, how airplanes fly, careers in aerospace, as well as beautiful stories about pilots from long ago and the exploration that they did flying around the world. So I think that's how I got inspired. It was very simple, didn't cost any money, and look where it led.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's kind of cool. So one of the things that's neat is that you also had the experience early on of seeing gliders. And that not everybody can say that. Everybody can say they've seen planes fly out of airports and things like that, but seeing a glider tow and things like that, that aspect of the industry is pretty cool. I'm gonna blow your mind and tell you though, I know exactly what section in the library that was, because I used to go to the same section for aviation and aerospace, and it's the call number 629. So,
Very good.
yeah, that I was raised by educators, and so as my interest grew in aviation and everything else, my parents did the same thing. They were like, "Oh, you need to go to the library and take some books out." So I basically read the entire section on both the aviation and aerospace side. It was pretty enlightening. So you're growing up and you're seeing this. At what point did you say, this is something I want to pursue? Because I think, as we talk to you, we're going to find out that you studied mathematics and and that type of thing. So, how did that all tie into you also wanting to pursue a career in aviation?
Well, I wanted to, first of all, I wanted to be a math teacher growing up. And that was kind of maybe a logical progression for a young girl growing up in the 1960s and 70s. I saw my teachers every day, and I thought, well, maybe that's what I'll do when I grow up. And I did get the opportunity to be a math teacher. I taught at the Air Force Academy for 3 years during my Air Force career. But you asked about how did the flying bug first set in. And, I mentioned the glider port, but the other thing was I remember one day, and I was in fourth grade, I was sitting in, my teacher was Mrs. Whitmarsh. I still remember my teachers. They were great, but I was reading a junior scholastic magazine, and in the magazine was an article on the Gemini astronauts. Now, they were all men back in those days, but that didn't matter to me. I just figured I'd be a lady astronaut. And I read about them and I thought, hey, I could do that also. And I saw that they were all military pilots. They were test pilots. They were mostly engineers. And so I thought I would pattern my career after them. And, this is so far off. And, back in the 60s, the only people that were astronauts were like Superman or superhumans. And so it wasn't the kind of thing I was going to tell people I want to be an astronaut. I thought they would just laugh at me. So I just kind of kept that in the back of my mind. I'll do the pilot routine. I knew, even as a child, I knew that being a pilot was going to lead into the astronaut training someday. So that was the plan that I set as a youngster. Although I kept the teaching as a reality check, something that I still knew that I would love to do.
How did mom and dad feel about you having that kind of an aspiration in that era?
Well, I don't think my parents knew until I called them and told them I was going to Johnson Space Center to do the week-long interview to be an astronaut. I think that's the first time I told them that I was going to, that I had a goal of being an astronaut someday. I didn't want to scare them because, the Challenger accident happened in 1986. I became an astronaut in 1990, and I knew my parents would be worried about me. So I kind of waited to keep them from worrying. I waited until I actually got to the point of the interview, because once you interview, there were only 100 people that did that, and they were going to hire 25. So I knew I had at least a 25% chance of being selected to the astronaut program. So that's when I told my parents. I do not remember how they reacted. I think it was just more of, okay, keep us informed. They didn't tell me
keep us
not
posted
to do it.
Yeah.
I think my parents were very supportive, and they, through the whole thing, they were really great. In fact, when I wrote my book, I dedicated it to my parents, because they really, they never told me, we want you to be a pilot, we want you to be an astronaut, but they were great parents. My dad always told me not to be a follower. He taught me to be a leader. And I remember him, he was very colorful. He would say things like, if all your friends jumped off the Walnut Street Bridge, would you jump
Would
off
you
the Walnut
follow?
Street? And then my mother would always tell me that every person on this planet is different. All of us are unique. There's no two people that are exactly the same. And I think because of that, those things that my parents told me, I was able to maybe have the thoughts in my mind or have the courage to go out and try to do things that were different.
Yeah. So that's an interesting perspective about it. I guess one of the things, it's neat that your dad gave you words of encouragement about pursuing what you want to do. How much of a role did the first few women that tried back at the very early days of space exploration unsuccessfully? I mean, they completed the requirements successfully, but they were not selected. How much of a factor was that for you as you were going through the process of becoming an astronaut, getting approved to go into astronaut training?
Well, I would say there's two things there. I think you're talking about the women who eventually were called the Mercury 13. And in 1961, those women, I believe there were 25 of them initially, that went through the same medical testing and psychological testing, endurance testing that the male astronauts went through in the Mercury program. So the women were not selected to be astronauts because they were not test pilots, is what NASA said. Now, here's the thing. I was not aware of those women. And by the way, 13 of them passed the testing, and those ones became known as the Mercury 13. I was not aware of them until 1994, after I was already selected as an astronaut. But I will say the women that inspired me, that I was very aware of, were the women Air Force service pilots that flew during World War II. And they flew here in the United States. They were test pilots, they were ferry pilots, they flew the airplanes, tested them when they came out of the factory.
Every kind of airplane that was put out.
Yes, yes. So those women, yes, they inspired me because I had read about them being in the 1940s. There was plenty of time for those books to be written. So as a child in the 60s and 70s, I read about those women.
And so that was a big piece of it. So with all of this going on, and you're going into it, you just mentioned something earlier that I think is really key. And people generally, and I'm talking about just the general public, kind of see the risk of space travel. You know, there's a certain amount of risk in getting on one of those rockets and going out in orbit, et cetera, and so forth. You actually applied to be an astronaut, I'm realizing, after the Challenger accident. So with something like that happening, what was going through your mind as you were, pursuing this opportunity?
Well, I followed the NASA space shuttle program closely when I was a pilot in the Air Force. I remember where I was when the Challenger accident happened. I was in graduate school and I was driving into class that morning and I heard it on the radio. And that was obviously very tragic. It was very sad. It was a huge, I want to say, review of what the United States is doing in our space program. Should we have a space shuttle? How safe is it? And without going into all the lessons learned from the Challenger accident, which were many, many we remembered, many we didn't remember because we had the Columbia accident 17 years later, I still wanted to be an astronaut. And I think from a test pilot's point of view, frankly, an Air Force pilot, any military pilot, from a test pilot's point of view, if you understand what caused an accident and you understand how the correction was made to make that spacecraft fly safely again, then you make the choice to take that risk to fly yourself. So I was very educated on what caused the Challenger accident and the fix. Remember, it was the O-rings that burned through. And NASA not only made one fix, but it made numerous fixes to prevent that problem from ever happening again. And I felt that was safe enough for me to apply to the program and eventually fly myself. And I really think that it's not really what caused the last accident as much as what are the unknowns. And that's the people that fly test aircraft or fly a spacecraft, which is frankly still very much in the test phase, the space shuttle was. We make the choice to fly. We take that risk based on what we know and what we understand, and we can choose not to fly. In my case, we can maybe talk about this later, when there is a known problem, I would talk to management about that. Because management had the budget, they could fix things that we thought were unsafe. I would talk to them and then say, hey, I don't think it's safe for the astronauts to fly. This thing needs to be fixed. And we would deal with it that way.
Yeah. So I have 1,000 questions to ask you, but I'll try to narrow it down to 10. No, I want to go back to your becoming a test pilot and actually your military experience, because it's going to lead to some things I want to ask you on the astronaut side of things. So when you finally went into military flight training, tell us a little bit about that, how you ended up, what type of aircraft did you end up flying, and how that morphed into you becoming a test pilot, because a test pilot of any sort is a very unique flying skill set and mentality. So I'd love to hear about your perspective on that.
Well, I like to say that for a military pilot, an operational pilot, you learn the aircraft, you learn the procedures. In fact, we have bold-faced procedures that we memorize And then we have the procedures that are written in the checklist. You follow those procedures to a T. And it's very important that you follow the procedures because of safety. And all of these things have been tested beforehand. Now, the difference with a test pilot is that person needs to be a lot more creative, because the test pilot is not only testing the aircraft and the systems in the aircraft, but that pilot is writing the procedures and setting, I want to say, the framework in which that aircraft will be operating. So the test pilot needs to be more experienced, not only in flying the aircraft, but in what the mission requires. And that mission can be transport aircraft, it can be fighter aircraft for air to air, air to ground, it can be close air support. So the test pilot really needs to understand the mission and make that aircraft fit the mission. So I would say that's the difference. And there's really a mindset. Again, you're an operational pilot, you know the mission, you stay within the procedures.
Yeah.
You got to do it safe. Test pilot, more creativity.
Got you. But at what point in your military flying did you say, I want to do that?
Well, I think I wanted to be a test pilot even before I became, before I attended flight training when I was 21 years old. So test flying was something I've been thinking about ever since I read the books about what a test pilot does when I was a teenager.
Okay.
So I just took one step at a time.
Yeah. So you were thinking about it even before flight training, and I'm going to ask a real fundamental question. What made you pick going into military to train as to be a pilot versus a civilian route, as an example?
Well, I would say it was the books that I read, because as I read books about civilian pilots and military pilots. I really thought that the military flying, for several reasons, was the way to go. I was attracted to the military lifestyle. I'm a person who's organized. I like to follow procedures. I like to know what's expected of me. At heart, I am not the most creative person. I try to be, but I think, at least as a young person, I was attracted to the military life. And a lot of it had to do with the opportunities that the military presented, even if I wasn't going to be a pilot. But if we stick in with the flying careers, the opportunities to fly a jet aircraft, there was no way that I would have the money to do that. Not only
Right.
considering my upbringing, but the normal person just does not have the money to go out and fly jet aircraft. So I was 21 years old, go up to pilot training. I'm immediately flying a 2-engine jet aircraft, which back in those days was the T-37. And then 6 months later, I was flying a T-38, a supersonic high performance jet aircraft at 21 years old. So those are some big responsibilities that you get at a young age. And 21-year-old pilots are certainly capable of doing that. Not everybody makes it through the training. The training is very difficult. It's very regimented. And of course, you're sitting in an ejection seat. You've got a helmet on. You've got a G suit. You're breathing oxygen. Some people get claustrophobic. You've got to be able to adapt to that type of cockpit environment. And I found that I was able to adapt to that pretty well. And although I wasn't a very good athlete, when I was a teenager, I found that I actually could fly an airplane pretty well. So I think I found my niche in the military.
Yeah, and as a military pilot, did you find that was a very contributing or positive factor for what you would eventually do as an astronaut? I mean, and I think you mentioned to me you've done a comparison of flying a military aircraft versus flying the space shuttle, which I would imagine could be two completely different animals.
Well, that's true. Now, I used to tell people that, flying the space shuttle, this is an exact comparison, but it feels similar to flying an F-16. And I flew the F-16 several times when I was test pilot school out at Edwards. But I see the space shuttle as three different entities. It's a rocket, it's a satellite, and it's an airplane. So on launch, we were a rocket. In space, we operated as a satellite, and returning to Earth, we operated as an airplane. And the pilot still had the control stick that you would used to command the aircraft's attitude and flight path, but the output that would actually send you in the direction you wanted was different. So on launch, when you're a rocket, it was the thrust vector control. In orbit, when you're a satellite, it was the small jets that we called RCS, reaction control jets, that would fire to roll, pitch, yaw. And when I say the 6 degrees of freedom, roll, pitch, yaw, and then X, Y, and Z translations. And then
Right.
returning home, you flew it like an airplane. The control stick commanded the elevons in the rudder, which are the flight control surfaces. So,
Yeah.
so the space shuttle, yes, it was an airplane, but it was also a rocket and a satellite.
Gotcha. You know, the biggest goal of this program is to help the up and coming generation to figure out what it is that they like to do, to inspire them about the industry, but also help them kind of determine what they would like to do and what path they're most likely going to take. And every guest that I've had on, and I would gather that you're probably the same, is we can have an idea of what we want to do, but when we're actually taking that path, it could go a lot of different directions before we get to the end game of whatever our goal is. What kind of perspective can you share with those in our audience about that, and you know, from where they might be in high school to if they're currently at an Embry-Riddle or UND or one of the other aviation-centric universities, and they're on a particular track, but they're still also, while they're doing that, trying to figure out what's next. Well, can you share some perspective on that?
Well, I would first of all say always have a backup plan. Now, I like to tell young people to set your sights high, and you might be sitting there thinking, well, I'm not really sure I could make it to airline pilot someday, or I'm not sure I could make it to, flying a military fighter, whatever goal you want to set. Maybe you want to fly the Thunderbirds or the Blue Angels. I mean, I would say set your sights high and try for these things, whatever it is that you are aspiring to. Try for those, but always have a backup plan, because many of these opportunities, they're very few and far between, and there's many barriers along the way. Probably one of the biggest barriers, at least for the astronaut program, is your health, and you don't always have control over your health. For example, the astronaut selection board has requirements on your eyesight, your hearing. There's many tests that you go through, and you might find out, oh, maybe I have some medical issue that I didn't know about, and you're disqualified. And that happens to, I don't want to say a lot of people, but it happens to a number of people in each selection class. So always have a backup plan. And, my backup plan was, of course, I mentioned earlier, I wanted to be a teacher, primarily
right?
a math teacher, but also, flying in the civilian world was an option for me. I wanted to be an airline pilot also. I thought that would have been a great job. And so just kind of, have or maybe have a couple of backup plans that you can fall back to.
Yeah, yeah. As I was going to ask you that, that's interesting that as a backup plan, you considered the possibility of being an airline pilot. You did fly the C-41s, so that would have probably been a fairly natural transition of doing that. I'm trying to think of what the other perspective that I wanted to ask you about. I guess again for our younger audience, and that is okay. Yeah, have a backup plan, and you think about what you want to do. But I know that one of the things that I always hear from them are how to handle challenges that they may face, particularly women who feel like that they may be dealing with a glass ceiling or other challenges in the industry. And as healthy as the industry is and as great as things are going, there's still the reality that there's growth to be had in terms of more women and just more diversity in general in the industry. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I want the young women as well as the young men to know that women are very welcome into the aviation world. Not only welcome, but we're trying to get more women to consider aviation, whether it's being a pilot or going into maintenance, going into air traffic control, going into management, maybe working, for the FAA or the National Transportation Safety Board, working at NASA, which, NASA does have airplanes, but we're primarily space flight. But the industry is asking for women, young women, to please consider us. And same thing for the young men, please consider us. From my perspective, I think my generation maybe was drawn a little bit more to aviation than the current young generation, because I'm not sure if the mass media is really getting the word out. There's so many distractions nowadays with social media, and there's a lot of attention on the entertainment industry. And, I think that might be too much focus on things like entertainment. And I think young people should look at the real jobs in the real world that are hugely rewarding. And just one more thing to say about women, I wrote the book Through the Glass Ceiling to the Stars to know that, so young women can know that pretty much every position out there a woman has been in, whether it's astronaut or airline pilot. And I would like to mention Tammy Jo Schultz, who was the Southwest captain, that she had an engine failure on her flight. And because of her training, and I think she called her book Nerves of Steel, she brought that plane back and safely landed it and saved the lives of all of those passengers. Whereas honestly, I'm going to say that wasn't easy. I hate to say it, but another pilot may not have been able to do that. So I think that she proved that, when you walk onto an airplane and you look to the left and you see in the cockpit, you have a woman captain or first officer, you are in capable hands, because the women really have done it and can do it. So I think just, look at the women who've flown really over the past couple decades. There's more and more of us. And the guys have been great about welcoming the women into the career field. So I have had, frankly, I'm going to say little to no resistance from the men. I think maybe sometimes they try harder when there's a woman around.
Yeah, they feel like they may be shown up. I think that it's funny you mentioned Tammy. I had Tammy on a couple of months ago, and I had a great conversation with her. The one thing that stands out more than anything with that particular incident with the Southwest flight, was that she was cool as a cucumber. I mean, the Nerves of Steel is an appropriate title for the book, because she just, as everything was kind of falling apart around her, she was going through, okay, well, we need to do this and we need to do that, and this is, if we make this happen, we can get this plane on the ground safely. And that is impressive. That's as impressive as the actual feat of landing the aircraft safely. So I think there's a lot to be said about that. You were talking about the different careers, and I like to talk about that on all the shows, that there are so many different opportunities in the industry. Yes, being a pilot, being an astronaut, but being a mechanic, or working, as you said, in air traffic control, and all of the other areas. And the thing that I like to emphasize is that regardless of your quote unquote skill set, there's a place for it in the industry. So you may like to do something a certain way, or you may have a talent with design or with mathematics or whatever. That doesn't mean you have to be an engineer. And I've seen firsthand young people that have gotten a degree or gotten a certification in something that you would not expect them to then end up working for SpaceX or NASA or whatever the case may be. So a point well taken on that. I wanted to go back to the discussion we were having a little bit further, because I really think it makes a pretty strong statement, and that was, again, you got into astronaut training after a space shuttle accident, and then you had the opportunity to pilot a space shuttle, and then there was another space shuttle accident, and it was shut down for a number of years, and then you flew again as a commander. I just think that that's pretty amazing, and says a lot about you, but it also says a lot about the systems in place, the industry, and how that all works. So, without sounding so journalistic, what was going through your mind as you transitioned through these different phases with regard to the space shuttle?
Well, the you mentioned the Columbia accident, the space shuttle, the loss of the space shuttle Columbia, which happened February 1st of 2003. The day that accident happened, my crew was the next mission to go up. We were only 5 weeks from launch when that
Hmm.
accident happened, and it was tragic. We did not know for for several days, at least, even a lead as to what caused it. I remember I went into work that Monday morning, and I went down to my training manager, and he works for me. He sets up the crew schedule, and I told him, I'm going to fly this mission if it takes 5 years. We're going to get the shuttle back flying again. And I still
Wow.
remember the day that I said that, because it took 2.5 years to get the space shuttle flying again after that accident. And I remember saying that to him because in my mind, over that 2.5 years, that I remember saying that to him, saying, I really didn't think it was going to take 5 years. I really didn't think it was going to take even 2 years. We didn't know. But I thought, as the commander of the next flight, if I had decided to retire or quit, that would send a very bad message throughout the entire space shuttle program. All the people that were working on getting the shuttle back to flight again were looking up to me and my crew for leadership. Whether it was our knowledge of our leadership or our communication ability or our integrity, or just the fact that we believed in space flight and we believed in space exploration. And I decided I was going to stick with it. Anything that I thought was unsafe, I would just talk with with the space shuttle program management and say, we really need to fix this before we fly again. And I think that's why it took so long, because we not only did we have to fix the cause of the accident, which was the foam that fell off the fuel tank and hit the wing. We had to fix that, but there were other things that we were flying with that were kind of borderline, and maybe they could cause an accident. So and there were a number of them, and we had to get those fixed also. And that's what took so long. But I really think that my crew, believed in the space shuttle program. The mission of the shuttle was to build the space station. The mission of the space station is to understand the human body in space over long periods of time in microgravity, so we can go back to the moon and go to Mars. And I think we really believed in these long-term goals of our country's, frankly, for the whole planet, of space exploration, getting people off of Earth and out into space. So I think that motivation is what kept me going. And that was a very, very difficult time. Of my professional life, that was the hardest 2.5 years that I had ever experienced. It was not easy. There were emotional times. There were times that you wanted to quit. We couldn't quit. There were times when you really had to work on getting people to talk with each other and to work together. There was a limited budget. We couldn't fund everybody's program. So we had to make tough decisions. So we got there. In fact, there were 18 more flights after I flew what was called the return to flight mission, which happened in 2005. There were 18 more flights of the shuttle that I think we added a few on top of that. And we finished building the International Space Station, which was the goal. And by the way, the space station is still up there flying, and it's doing its mission. It feels good to, follow. I think they're doing a spacewalk today, and it feels good to follow what they're doing up there, knowing that myself and my crew were part of making that space station happen.
So you guys, your actual return to flight was a major part of finishing the space station. Was it considered completed after that?
Yes. So when we flew our mission in 2005, the space station was a little bit more than halfway complete. There were the Russian segments and the US segments the main portion was already up there, but we had not launched the Japanese or the European segments yet, or the remainder of the American segments. So there were people talking about shutting down the shuttle program, saying we killed 2 crews, we crashed 2 space shuttles. Why are we still flying this spacecraft when it's we believe it's unsafe. Well, the astronauts were willing to continue flying it because we know the space shuttle. We knew it well enough to know that we could continue to fly it safely. And the decision was made to fly the space shuttle only until the space station was completed. That was the original reason we built the shuttle, was to build a space station. And once the space station was completed, we would retire the shuttle and replace it with a smaller, cheaper, and safer spacecraft. And now we have SpaceX is flying their Dragon capsule taking our astronauts to and from the space station. We also have Boeing that is building a spacecraft that will take the astronauts to and from. And of course, the Soyuz, the Russian craft, is going there. And we've got other spacecraft in development that'll be going to and from the space station.
Yeah. You spent some time on the space station, correct?
That's right. So when my crew went up there in 2005, we docked. I think we were docked for about a week. The mission itself was 15 days long. So maybe we were docked a little over a week. And our purpose was, remember, the space station had not been resupplied by the shuttle in 2.5 years. So we had quite a bit of equipment, supplies, experiments to take to the astronauts that were on the station. There were only 2 on the station. We had to, because we didn't have a shuttle flying, we had to take the crew from 6 down to only 2 because of the lack of supplies. But I did spend the time on the space station. My job was primarily to oversee, as the commander, to oversee the transfer of 5,000 pounds to the station. And then we brought back the equipment that frankly, they're garbage, and anything old that they weren't using anymore. We were kind of like a big moving van. But we also took these amazing experiments. We took up something called the Human Research Facility, where the astronauts, long duration astronauts, can run these experiments on themselves and help the researchers understand how the human body adapts to being in space, as well as
this goes back to something we were talking about a little earlier, and that is all of the opportunities. It's a large team of people that put the space shuttle in orbit, or any spacecraft in orbit. There's a large team of people that deal with the different aspects of the International Space Station. That teamwork and the leadership. So your leadership in terms of saying, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to go back up, I'm sure played a really large role. Tell us a little bit about the interaction with the other astronauts and the rest of the team, which is quite a few people, in terms of how you guys were able to pull together, coordinate, and get things done to continue to move forward with the program.
So we had a big program called RTF, Return to Flight, and it was led by the Space Shuttle Management, the Space Shuttle Program Manager, who was a person that I kept close coordination with, as well as the flight directors that run the mission control side. And then, of course, I mentioned the Space Shuttle program. We had the external tank program, the solid rocket boosters, as well as the orbiter. And so within the astronaut office, the astronauts all geared up, took a position to follow the return to flight based on, whatever segment, we break it down to even smaller segments. We had teams that were in charge of spacewalks, EVA, some that were in charge of robotics, some that were in charge, that were helping out with how to do the inspection of the outside of the shuttle. And I could go on and on with all these different types of jobs, but frankly, the astronauts were all supporting the return to flight effort. And my crew was training. So we were going through a typical training flow where we would do ascent simulations, practice malfunctions. We did on-orbit simulations. We did entry. We practiced the shuttle training aircraft, which is a Gulfstream 2, myself and my pilot, which is how we keep our currency and how to land the space shuttle. We use the Gulfstream 2 because you can't actually practice your landings in a real space shuttle. You only get one shot at it. So my crew was going through the training, but while we were training, I was trying to attend these meetings where decisions were being made. Well, I certainly didn't have time to do that. So I had 2 astronauts assigned to me that their job was to attend the meetings, and they would come back and tell me what decisions were made, and I could make my input through them. So we had a pretty well organized return to flight program that I thought was working very well. We didn't always agree with the decisions that were made. So when I didn't agree with something, I was able to get that feedback either in person or through my assigned astronauts. And in the end, when we finally flew, my crew was happy with the decisions that were made, and we felt that it was going to be a safe and successful flight, which it was. In fact, I believe that when we eventually flew that flight in the summer of 2005, it was going to be the safest space shuttle flight that had ever flown. And that was true. And then each flight after that, as we learned more and made more corrections, each flight, subsequent flight, was safer. And I'm
Yeah.
actually very proud of the effort that the space shuttle program put forward, because we had made mistakes leading up to that accident. And of course, nobody wanted a accident to happen. I mean, no one wanted to see an entire crew lose their lives. That is, something that we're always working to be safe, but mistakes were made. And I actually have a whole talk on that, on the mistakes that were made. And a lot of it was technical and a lot of it was organizational flaws, or maybe the way we were making decisions was flawed. And those lessons that led to the accident need to be taught and learned by all future employees in any space program, government or private, because there's so much to be learned.
Yeah, so to encourage the next generation that's looking at doing something in space exploration, what would you say to them to alleviate the concern about safety and the future of these programs that are currently underway and moving forward?
Okay, so launching into space is still risky. We are at a point in the evolution of spaceflight where it is still risky. I believe in the future, as we fly more and we get more launches up there and we learn more, it's going to get safer and safer. And I honestly think someday launching into space will almost be as safe as flying in an airplane, but it's not right now. And those that choose to fly in space are still taking a risk. But I will say there are inherent risks. Inherent risk is we're on a controlled explosion. There's nothing you can do about that. It is an inherent risk. But then you have residual risks that you do have control over. What can we do to make that controlled explosion as safe as possible? And that has to do, I could give a whole talk on that. It has to do with design. It has to do with testing. It has to do with, learning from history, making the right decisions, testing. And then there's all kinds of risk management techniques, like probabilistic risk management is one of the techniques that was used in the shuttle program to make sure that we're doing this as safe as possible. So it takes a lot of effort, and it really takes a safety mindset. I still encourage people to apply to the astronaut program. I would do it myself today if I had the chance. I think that spaceflight is getting safer. I think today it's much safer than it was in the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo days, because we've learned so much more. So, I'd say that's my answer. But spaceflight is not for everyone, but you can still be part of the program as an engineer, flight controller. And you had mentioned earlier about the variety of careers. I also want to mention, if you are a lawyer, a doctor, a teacher, an artist,
Precisely.
a financial person, there's still jobs for you in the space program. And you can be an analyst, you can be a risk management person. There's still jobs for you in the space program, because space, I want to say career fields, I haven't yet thought of one that doesn't fit. I think that if you enjoy exploration and want to be part of it, regardless of what you do, there's a job there.
Well, and as we do these longer space exploration trips to places like Mars, you need all of the above at some point. So if you're going to
And
be,
we need smart people too.
yes, yeah, absolutely. Um, I wanted to go back to something I meant to ask you at the beginning. How meaningful is it for you to be considered the first female pilot of a space shuttle, the first commander of a space shuttle? What did it mean to you then? What does it mean to you now?
Well, it means a lot to me. I think it's a real honor and it's a privilege. And I think the reason I'm here is because my life, the intersection of my life and the intersection of the history of the space program happened to come together at a point in time. And my availability, I want to say, to be the first space shuttle woman pilot and commander has to do with when I was born. Frankly, that's it. And then along with that, my desire to go into the aviation career field. So I don't let that go to my head. I don't have a big ego about it. In fact, I actually actively work to stay humble. I'm a big promoter of humility because I believe that the best leaders are people that are good listeners and can put their ego away. And today we say inclusive. That's a very important word. We want to be inclusive. So when someone speaks up, we listen to what they have to say, even if maybe they're new or maybe they're young, but heck, maybe they got a good idea that we hadn't thought of yet. So I try to put my ego aside and be a good listener. And I think you asked me about being the first. I think it's an opportunity to try to work my best to be the best leader I can be, and also to remember the mistakes that I made so I can, with humility, share the mistakes I made with young people so they can learn from what I did. And again, that's why I wrote my book, because I made so many mistakes, I put them all in the book. So people can read about that and say, well, maybe I didn't always make the right decisions, or maybe I didn't study hard enough or plan well enough for this one mission, and what the result was of that, and how I changed my ways to do better in the future.
Sure. Tell us about your book. When did you decide to write it? And I know you had a co-author with it, and what made you decide to do it? And tell us what's in it.
So I decided to write it when the pandemic hit. My co-author is Jonathan Ward, and he's written 3 previous books on the Apollo program and also on the Columbia accident. So he had asked me prior to the pandemic about writing a book. I just said, I don't have enough time. I'm too busy. I can't write a book. Well, in March of 2020, when the pandemic happened and there was a shutdown, I wrote back to Jonathan and I said, I think we might be able to do this now. So we got ourselves a publisher, which was hard. It's hard to get a publisher, but we worked on it. With the advice in cooperation of a literary agent, we found the publisher. We wrote the book. It took a year to write the book, and
That's pretty quick.
I wanted the book to be. It's in the category of memoirs, but I wanted it to be more than that. I wanted it to be lessons learned also. So I put in here, as I mentioned earlier, lessons learned, mistakes I made. There's not a whole lot of, I want to say, bragging like you might find in some aviation books, but I think the stories are there from when I was a child and the role of my parents, how I decided to join the Air Force, what my missions were like in the Air Force. I mean, I flew into Grenada back in 1983 when the United States invaded to rescue those medical students that were held hostage. I was part of that. How I got into test pilot school, my experience there, how I applied to the astronaut program, the interview process, and my 4 missions and more. And how I'm a mother also. I got married before I became an astronaut. I flew my first mission. I had my daughter, flew a second mission, a third mission. Then I had my son, and then I flew a 4th mission. And then the process I went through when I decided to retire. And frankly, I thought I'd just spend a couple years raising my family. And what I did, post astronauting, I found that there were many things out there that I can do, from teaching to advisory panels to speaking and writing. And there was just a variety of things that I still do.
Those
But
of
thanks
us
for
in
asking.
aviation and aerospace do not know how to spell retirement. We do not know the definition of retirement. we, we managed to find something else to do in the industry after we quote unquote retire.
That's right.
But on a more serious note, I want to go back to something. I was going to ask you that too. When you were going through all of this again with the space shuttle, the accidents, and that, you said it was a very difficult time. You were raising a family at the time. So what was that like for you in terms of dealing with that, your family dealing with it, and probably their concerns about it, et cetera, and also even with your children and explaining to them what you were trying to do?
Right. Well, that's something I definitely wrote about. Now, my daughter was 7 when the accident happened, and she was 9 when the return to flight happened. My son was much younger. He was 2 and 4, so he was a little bit easier. But my daughter was difficult because I had told her about the Challenger accident from 1986, and I told her, I want you to know that this happened and it's never going to happen again. 1 month later, we had the Columbia accident. So I think she might have lost a little bit of trust in me. Not that I did anything intentional, but she was really scared about her mom flying into space at age, she's only 7 years old. So I tried, of course, my husband was a big help. We had a nanny who was helping us out. I had to have a nanny because the hours of astronaut are kind of crazy, and my husband was an airline pilot, so we were constantly juggling our schedule. But I found that I loved being a mother. I still love, my kids are older now, but I still love being a mom. I loved my job as an astronaut. I used to tell people I have the 2 best jobs in the world, and I had lots of energy to just keep going through it. But it was important that I talked to my daughter. Also for my crew, remember, I've got 7 crew members, and many of them were married and had children. So we set up family affairs where our families got to know each other. We brought them out to training sessions. We let them ride in the simulator. They got to see the T-38. They got to see the shuttle training aircraft. We took them out to the pool where we practice our spacewalks. So we tried to get all of our children on the crew to know each other and to see the training. And I really believe the more you know about something, the less fear that you have. So we conquer
I
our
agree with
fear
that.
with knowledge. And so that was I want to say, our crew strategy to help the families. Of course, they were still worried. And it wasn't until we actually landed and got out of the shuttle that they were able to relax. And the families go through a difficult time. I will acknowledge that, but I think that we can do our best to try to make it as easy as possible for them.
Any future astronauts in the household there?
Not in my family. Neither one of my kids want to be astronauts, or I think they've had enough of mom and dad flying. But that's not true for everybody. There's a lot of pilot parents that have
Mm.
children that go on to be pilots. But I told my kids, you do whatever, you decide what you want to do with your life, and we will support you. We're not going to tell them what to do. We didn't tell them where to go to school. We told them where they could not go to school because there were some limits. But within the limits, we let them pick where they wanted to go.
And
And
what they wanted to
so,
study.
in what they
Yeah,
want to study, correct.
yeah, yeah. Before we start to wrap things up, you have been involved in a number of aviation and aerospace associations, which is great. I love talking about the associations. I think they play a very important role in our industry. And I also think that they can be very beneficial to the up and coming, the next generation that wants to meet people and network and learn from that side of things. Can you share with us a little bit about your background with regard to your roles with different associations and what that's meant to your career?
Well, there's so many of them. I'm not sure if I can get them all in there, but when I was young, I was a member of the Air Force Association because that, they had programs for their young, for the cadets, the ROTC cadets. But today, for the people that are listening, I would ask you to take a look at the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. It's sponsored by the astronauts, and you obviously don't have to be an astronaut or even want to be an astronaut. But if you are in college and you have a STEM degree, you can apply for a scholarship through the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. And that's one of the organizations. I'd also want to mention Women in Aviation International, which
Yes.
is men can also join. It started out for women, but it's gotten to be so big. They have a huge convention every March. And trying to think, there's the AIAA, which is for engineering. I'm a member of them. And, for there's women military aviators. There's several organizations, and I'm going to kick myself
And
after
you've been involved in
I
all of
didn't
these?
mention. I'm a member of all of them, and I'm involved. I'm very involved with the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation because of the type of programs that they have. They like astronauts to support that, so I help them out and support them in a variety of their programs. And I'm on the boards of, I've been on the boards at the National Academy, the Astronaut Memorial Foundation. They have educational programs for teachers as well as for kids. The Astronaut Memorial. We maintain the memorial, but we also carry on the message of the memorial astronauts through our educational programs. And I'm actually on their board of directors, but now they're board of advisors. So I really support these organizations. I think it makes a huge difference for young men and women, and frankly, for people of all ages, to have that networking connection. And I really believe in the face-to-face meetings. I go to the Space Symposium every year, which is run by the U.S. Space Foundation. And that's civil and military space, probably the biggest collection of space professionals in the United States. And that happens every April. So I go to these events, not all of them because I don't have the time, but I try to support them all as best I can, because they really do not only help the networking, but they help young people learn and get to know people and decide what they want to do. Or frankly, if you're already out there in the workforce, maybe you want to change your career, and working with these organizations will give you an idea what the options are.
Yeah. As we wrap things up, any closing words for our audience in terms of their future and their goals and their aspirations?
Oh, well, there's so much that I could say, but I do want to say there are many spots along the way where you just like, maybe things aren't going right. I think back to how I got rejected for the Air Force Test Pilot School twice before I got in. I
Oh,
won't
you
go
didn't
into,
mention that before.
I won't, oh, it's in my book. I won't go into the reasons why, because a lot of them were just frustrating administrative reasons. But, I think back to the courses I was taking in college when, I used to set a goal of getting straight A's every semester. Of course, I never got straight A's, but that was my goal and I never achieved it. But, what the heck, I set a high goal. So I think you should set high goals, but don't beat up on yourself when you don't reach those goals.
Right.
But set high goals and then have backup plans. And, what great opportunities we have out there. Things don't always go right. When I came back from my first space flight, I remember thinking all the stresses in everyday life, and why are we so concerned about all these little stresses? Just try to, maybe I keep a list. It's one of my stress relievers. I keep a list and I try to keep it prioritized, and that helps me just handle every day. You have good days and bad days, and I just say keep on trucking and think about all the great opportunities there are out there, and what a great country we live in, and we just had Thanksgiving, so all the things we have to be thankful for.
Thankful
So I think
for.
that's
Yeah.
my final words. Thanks for
Well,
asking.
well said. How about showing us your book again, which I believe is
Yeah.
available at Barnes and Noble and on Amazon, to name a few. And I'm looking forward to reading it. I placed my order after I talked to you and found out you had a book. So it's exciting to wishing you absolutely the best with that, because it just came out in late October, right?
Yeah, it was published on October 19th of this year,
Okay,
so it's still brand new.
absolutely. Well, Eileen Collins, it has been an honor and a pleasure to have you on All Things Aviation and Aerospace. Really interesting to talk to you about all of the things that you've experienced in your background, and it's going to be very great to actually read it in the book and get all of the details about your career. A little side note, you and I are within a couple of months of each other age-wise, so it's even more poignant for me to be able to sit here with you and know that while I was doing what I was doing, you you were doing your thing to pursue eventually becoming an astronaut and commanding a space shuttle. So hats off to you with that.
We're
And
children of the Apollo years.
yes, Absolutely. So, anyhow, I wish you the best with everything, and with your book and your retirement. And thank you again for being on All Things Aviation Aerospace.
Yeah, I enjoyed talking with you. Thanks.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Vince Mickens, and this has been All Things Aviation Aerospace. As you know, every year, or every show, not every year, every show, I do my best to try to have guests on and talk about the opportunities in the industry, both on the aviation side in terms of commercial and business aviation, and then on the aerospace side, which has grown leaps and bounds as well. And the industry is really busy these days. There's a lot of opportunity out there. And as Eileen said, there's plenty of opportunities for whatever area you might be interested in or have a skill set in. So uh, be encouraged by that. Anyhow, thank you everybody for watching and listening. We'll catch you the next time on All Things Aviation and Aerospace.